Hey guys, my name is Charlie Wackley, I'm a Scientologist, and today I'm going to give you a really practical tip on how to lower your level of stress and anxiety. And it's very simple. Stop reading the news. So listen, I know that's a super simple example, and actually what L. Ron Hubbard says here is just as simple. He says, this is very simple. Tell the person, don't read the newspaper for 2 weeks and see if you don't feel better. Now, today, that extends beyond just the newspapers, because although maybe back in the 50s and 60s, the main source of news was newspapers. Now we still have newspapers, but look at what we have now in terms of all the different ways that news organizations like the BBC, CNN can communicate to us. We've got social media platforms, and that includes Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. There's several social media platforms that you're getting fed news from. There's the internet itself and each of the news reporters' separate websites. There's, as I said, newspapers, there's TV. You're constantly being bombarded by the news, and it's hard to get away from it. But if you can just follow this one thing and stop reading the news, you'll feel so much better. Now, actually, I'm going to pause here for a second because I want to find you a quote. On the subject of not reading the news, a lot of people bring up to me, okay, but what if you want to stay informed? What if you want to know what's going on? Well, there's a great quote here. He says, he's talking about the merchants of chaos here and news in itself. And he says, this is the cold-blooded manufacture of a dangerous environment. People do not need this news. And if they did, they need the facts, not the upset. So for example, again, to relate it to our current circumstance with this coronavirus, I don't read the news, and typically in my life, I've made that a general rule for many years now. But the one thing that I was watching, particularly at the beginning of this outbreak, was the regular updates from our Prime Minister, from Boris Johnson. And that was just factual. And in fact, the worst parts of those interviews were when the press questioned them and tried to get some kind of negative spin on things. But if you looked at just their briefing and the facts, as mentioned in that quote, you can get the facts, but don't get it from these twisted reports and news that will make it seem bad. He goes on to say in that article, is there such a thing as good press? And I'm sure if you scroll through your news feed or you go through the BBC website, you will struggle to find anything positive or good about what's reported in the news. I would likely estimate that it's less than 10% of what you'll see on national newsstands. Now, if maybe on social media you tend to have a really positive group of friends, maybe you'll get less of that. But I know I've got a positive group of friends and I'm still getting 5G this and was it manufactured and who made it's China's fault and da-da-da-da. And I've got a really positive friendship group. So I know that for me, scrolling through my social media feed is going to make me feel more anxious, more stressed. One of the worst things you can do first thing in the morning, pick up your phone, start scrolling through Instagram, Facebook. You're guaranteed to feel worse. So it's a very simple piece of advice. It might be slightly counterintuitive because you want to stay informed and you want to know what's happening in your environment. But if you want to know, find a source of factual information that's not manipulated or made to produce a certain reaction of fear and anxiety. Just get facts and leave it at that. You don't need streams of news. You don't need to read all the newspapers. You don't need to stream through social media to find out what's going around you. And you know what's even better advice than that? Just look. Like, it's your environment, it's right outside. Go and look. Go and actually talk to people in your environment. Talk to people in your community. Now, I know that's difficult. I know you have to do it with social distancing or over the phone, but your own observation is much more likely to be closer to the truth than taking it through this third party who may or may not have a vested interest in your reaction. So if you want to reduce your level of stress, if you want to reduce your level of anxiety, I implore you to stop reading the fake news. Just that one piece of advice will make you feel better. And he says to do it like this. Don't read the newspaper for 2 weeks and see if you don't feel better. Then he says, if he doesn't read newspaper for 2 weeks, of course he will feel better. It's almost, It's like a guaranteed. If you don't read the news for 2 weeks, even if you switch it off completely, don't even get the facts, switch it off completely, I guarantee you are going to feel better. Then tell him, now read the newspaper for a week. And at the end of that week, you will find you feel worse. Then make up your mind whether or not you ought to pay attention to the newspapers. Now, I really like that because rather than me just sitting here and lecturing you about don't read the newspaper, how about trial it? You know, do the 2 weeks of not reading it, see how you feel, and then go back on it for a week, which it's like almost, I feel bad giving you that advice because I know you're going to feel worse. But then you know for yourself, then you have like a black and white comparison of what it feels like to not read the news, to not be connected to the news, and what it feels like to consume the news on a daily basis. I don't know how much people consume the news, but if they're watching like the 10 o'clock news, the 12 o'clock news, the 6 o'clock news, the 10 o'clock news, and scrolling through social media, that's a lot of bad news, especially now when you're not working. I don't know, maybe people are consuming even more news. So if you or anyone you know is feeling stressed or anxious or worried or overwhelmed, give them this one piece of advice. He goes on to say, this could be proposed to the person as a simple experiment. It isn't even an expensive experiment. As a matter of fact, it's cheaper not to buy the newspaper than to buy them. Now, in a lot of our cases, our news consumption is free, but there are certain subscriptions, newspapers, etc. So he's just saying it's basically free to do this experiment. In fact, you might come out of it with more money, not less. This is a simple action, but a very effective one, which can markedly change a person's outlook in life. Now, that's a lot, can markedly change. That means it can significantly change your outlook in life in general. And I can tell you a personal story. You know, I remember a good few years back, I'll talk about this maybe in more depth on a separate episode, but a good few years back, I really struggled with anxiety. And I would find that I'd wake up, particularly in the mornings for some reason, I'd wake up feeling very tense and tight and worried, and about nothing specific. It wasn't that I was worried about something that was going on in my life. I just felt tense and felt anxious. And I did exactly this advice because I used to travel on the underground to work and I'd read the metro. And then I got this piece of advice and I thought, you know what, that's sound. I'm gonna cycle to work and not read the metro. And within less than 2 weeks, within the first week, I felt significantly better. I wouldn't say it was like the total cure to my anxious feeling, but it was like a huge bump up. Like I remember feeling like, wow, I actually feel like calmer. I feel happier. I don't feel like as on edge. And I almost didn't realize what I changed. I was like, what have I changed? I'm cycling, getting more exercise, but I'm not reading the newspaper every morning. So it's probably one of the best and simplest pieces of advice to reduce your level of stress and anxiety. And especially in a time like this, I would really encourage you to do it and to encourage people around you to do it so that we can all live a calmer life. Hope this helps. See you guys.